Hello everyone. It's Sunday morning for me. This is Sunday the 25th of April, and on Friday the 23rd, President Biden formally recognized what happened in Turkey during World War I to the Armenian population as a genocide. And I wanted to talk a bit about that. The diasporic Armenian community, as well as those of us who study genocide, have been waiting for a declaration of this kind for a very long time. This was a campaign promised by President Obama in 2008, which he didn't deliver on. And so it's a really big deal that President Biden is doing this today. So I want to talk a little bit about why it's important, why this term is so loaded itself, what happened in Armenia to the Armenians, and then ask some questions that I'd love to see some discussion about in the discussion board, or you could choose to kind of go this direction for your final project about what it means, right? Why now? Why Turkey? Why Armenia? What is going on? Okay, so I have my computer in my lap. I'm looking at some notes. Let's get into this. So first of all, I think it's important to understand why the term genocide is such a loaded term. And oftentimes when we think about not calling something a genocide to a genocide in progress, it is because, as we saw last week, the definition of genocide from the UN, like the legal definition of what genocide is a very unique definition in that it entails a legal obligation to act. So once a country or the UN has officially recognized something that's happening as a genocide, there is an obligation to intervene. They have to do something. So that is why, for example, in the early 90s, when we're talking about Rwanda, there was such a hesitance to use the word genocide because it would come with it an obligation to act. And so there was a really big deal, especially in the United States, about whether or not this is actually going to be called a genocide. We saw this same hesitancy in the early 2000s with Sudan, South Sudan, and Darfur, the Darfur region. So that's oftentimes when we're talking about not identifying something as a genocide, that's why, right? So it's just why you're probably not going to see the president talking about the Uyghur population in China as experiencing a genocide, because that would then obligate the U.S. government to step in and act. Whereas if we just say that it's some sort of a, quote, ethnic cleansing, right? This was Kosovo. If it's just an ethnic cleansing, then that is basically the same thing, but it does not have a legal obligation to act. Okay, so what happened? So now that we know like what the big deal is about the definition itself, let's talk about what happened in Turkey. So remember, we have the Ottoman Empire. We talked about this way back in week 1. This is a confederation almost of a variety of different types of people. It's really huge. Remember that Turkey sits in a really strategically important, the Ottoman Empire at that time sat in a very important strategic place, right? And if you ever go to Turkey, which if you have the chance, it's wonderful, it's beautiful there. But right, it's basically the gateway between Europe and Asia. And so it becomes a very important place. Well, the Ottoman Empire in the early 1900s started to collapse. And in 1908, a group called the Young Turks and the Committee for Union in Progress, or CUP, seized power. And they seized power on this platform of, and this should sound familiar, modernization, secular reforms to the Constitution, etc., etc., etc. And so while all in progress, right, modern progress, this should all sound familiar. And while this was their stated platform, increasingly the Young Turks became nationalistic and eventually just pretty dictatorial. And so they're nationalistic. And remember in the Ottoman Empire, we talked about the word Turk was actually a pejorative term, right? It was more like a slur. Well, so the Young Turks are then kind of reclaiming that identity for themselves and creating, because this is nationalism, the identity of being a Turk as being a positive thing. So if you're not Turkish, like if you're Armenian or if you're Greek, that did not fit into this view of being Turkish, this very nationalistic view of being Turkish. Okay, so World War I starts. The Armenians are geographically located in between Turkey and Russia, so they are pegged as being kind of enemy agents by both sides. They are Christian, so they are targeted by the Turkish government, the Ottoman government, and basically removed, right? So first the leaders were killed, large swaths of the population were killed, everyone else was forced to either migrate, which is why you have a huge Armenian diaspora. They were starved, children were adopted out to Muslim families, some of them were forcibly converted. This is all happening at the very beginning and during World War I. I think it's important to note, kind of like I mentioned or I alluded to earlier, historians of genocide, other people who study this type of thing, have seriously, and obviously there are deniers, but I don't consider them kind of real real historians, just in the same way that I don't consider Holocaust deniers or real historians, right? The evidence-based historians outside of Turkey have long said that this was a genocide. However, inside of Turkey, it's viewed very differently. So as your videos discussed, out of the ashes, so after World War I, out of the ashes of the Ottoman Empire rose the modern Turkish nation, what we now call Turkey, led by Kemal Ataturk. And Ataturk really started to deliver on these promises of modernization, secularization, progress, etc. Right? This is a very Western view of modernization. But many of those significant ethnic groups, the Armenians, the Greeks, had been eliminated through the course of World War I. They were no longer part of Turkey. And in fact, in Turkey, it is so important to maintain the national narrative of Turkish greatness that it is illegal to talk about this as being a genocide. It is illegal to talk about this as being a genocide. It's illegal to talk badly about Turkey. Okay. So even if the Turks can't say that it was a genocide, why hasn't anybody else called it a genocide? Why hasn't the US called it a genocide before? Well, Turkey is, again, geographically very important. If you look at a map, Turkey shares a border with first Iraq and now Syria. And so for operations in Syria, the US actually uses Turkish military bases in order to kind of jump off into Syria. And losing those military bases would be a huge blow to operations in the region. However, we have obviously a new presidential administration. The former administration had a somewhat strained relationship with the Turkish president, and the analysis that I've read says that the Biden administration wants to deliver on this campaign promise and feels that this is a good time to do it, to kind of kick off a new foreign policy, if you will. So there's kind of and there we go. So new foreign policy, actually calling it genocide, really kind of putting a major strain on relations with Turkey, between Turkey and the United States. So I linked a couple articles, and in one of them, I wanted to highlight a quote from the Turkish foreign minister. So it says on Saturday, Turkey's foreign minister swiftly condemned Biden's remark. Quote, "We entirely reject this statement," he wrote on Twitter. "We have nothing to learn from anybody on our own past." End quote. We have nothing to learn from anybody on our own past. How do you feel about that quote? When we insulate our narrative of history and when we criminalize dissent, or even just discourage dissent, right? Discourage critical interrogation of our history. How does this affect, A, the national narrative, but B, everyday people? The people who may be left out of that narrative, the people who may have experienced something very different than what that national narrative says. That's one question for you. Another question, why is recognizing this genocide that is already over, right? The genocide is no longer happening. It's done. They're no longer killing Armenian people, thank goodness. But why is recognition of something that happened in the past so important? Why not just ignore it? What could it accomplish? What lessons could we learn from this that we could apply more broadly beyond just, say, Turkey? When I'm saying this, I'm thinking particularly of indigenous people in the United States, Native peoples of the United States, and enslavement, right? The Atlantic world enslavement. When we, this is the argument for, this turns into an argument for recognition, reparations. Where can this go? Where should this go? Right? This is obviously, this is a loaded topic, I understand, but this is what history is for. We can look to South Africa for some models for how this could look. And then finally, so applying things to the past is one thing. How could this impact what's happening in China or what's happening in Myanmar? How could this impact genocides that are currently taking place? Could it or maybe not? I don't have an answer to these questions. There's not right or wrong answers here. These are just things to think about, especially when we're talking about, there are a lot of historical trends that flow through this, right? It's not just mass killings. It is progress. It is modernization. It is nationalism. It is ethnicity and race. All of those things are kind of wrapped up in this nice package, and it gives us a vessel, if you will, through which we can view a lot of other historical trends. So I'd love to hear what y'all think. Either in the comments, like I'm some sort of influencer here, in the discussion board comments, or this would be a great thing to explore for your final project.